Hi everyone, I'm Rob Hudson. I lead a church in Dubai called Well of Life with my wife Linda, and I've been asked to talk about today how God kind of put the nations in my heart, I suppose. And it actually goes back to even before I was leading an eldership team. I'd been to a time where a genuine apostle had been sharing about God's vision for the church, and I was part of a church that was really small, and that's what I thought the church was. I thought it was a small little thing, a community of people that kind of gathered together to do their thing. I make sure that we had somebody around us when things were tough and people to celebrate with and when things were good. And obviously the church is that in part. But as this apostle spoke, I came to realize the church was something so much bigger, that the field for the church actually is not just the suburb that I was a part of, but actually the whole world. And fast forwarding a few years, got to the point where I'd come under eldership, and the guy that was leading the church was handing the leadership of that team to me. And it was a crazy time. We were, as I suppose many of you will be able to relate to, we were completely overwhelmed. We had two small kids. We suddenly had this church. I was going from preaching once every 8 weeks as part of the team to preaching a few times a week. I was absolutely out of my depth, and I think it would have been absolutely fair for me to just give myself a few years to figure out what was going on before I lifted my eyes up anywhere else. But by God's grace, I had been birthed into an apostolic movement, and somehow that call to the nations had been put into my blood. And so just 5 months into the journey, when we were genuinely, our heads were beneath the water, I think, in many ways, I bought a ticket to another nation. It was to Harare in Zimbabwe. And I flew across there, not really knowing what was in store for me, but feeling like I needed to get there. And I met the guy that was leading the work, pioneering the work into that nation. And I asked him a simple question. I said, Kenny, how can I serve you, and how can I serve this nation? And he said to me, he gave me an instructive. He said, won't you please go to the city called Bulawayo in Zimbabwe and just get behind the work that's going on there. And so a few months later, after flying back to Durban, I got a group of people together. We borrowed somebody's 4x4, and we drove the 1,700 miles, a return trip up to Zimbabwe, met with this man called Dumazweni Ndlovu, and just began to serve in that nation. And that was 16 years ago. Since then, we've become incredibly good friends at Dumi. We've planted churches together. We've had the most incredible adventures that you could ever imagine. And I kind of wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't taken that first step when I was completely out of my depth, where I've seen half of what I've seen today. And the thing that struck me about it was Acts 13, chapter 1, it says, in the church at. And I love the fact that it always starts in a place, in a very ordinary place. And it might be, wherever you're watching this from, you're thinking, well, if I was in Dubai, or if I was living there or here or somewhere else, if I was leading a church or something like that, I would, in one of these places, then I could do it. But it starts in the ordinariness of the place that you're at, in the same way that it started in Durban North for me. Honestly, a very ordinary place, a very ordinary church. We were a small church that met in a rented hall. There wasn't the finances or the resources for us to be able to do this, but we stepped out, and God honored that. The second thing that happened is we went really without knowing, a bit like Abraham's call, just go. And so we went into that not knowing how God would work it out, but we had a sense that there was an assignment that was given to us. Again, in Acts 13, it says of Barnabas and Saul that they were commissioned or set apart for the work the Holy Spirit had for them. And I believe God does have a work for every one of us. And there's a place, an assignment, a time where He wants us to respond to that. And if you will be obedient to God, you'll be able to come to a point where it's Acts 14:26. It says they reported back all that God had done and in the work that they had now completed. But if you read between Acts 13:1 and Acts 14:26, the kind of chaos that goes on, God is leading providentially. And so the biggest question to ask when you think about the nations is, Lord, the where and the when, don't ask so much the how. God reveals the how as you go along. And so we were just kind of obedient to God in that. And the last part of the mandate is just, and the most important part actually, is the gospel at the center of it all. And in the passage, there's this wonderful text where actually Paul's preach is actually recorded almost in full there. And it is the gospel. It's this wonderful good news of the forgiveness of sins and the freedom that comes in all the areas that the law could never give us. And we need to keep the gospel at the center. And my experience has been as we go, I suppose in many ways we're a one message people. We carry the message of Jesus Christ and what he's done. But in that message is an incredible seed, a seed that is both has inherent in it the power of salvation. And so we don't. It's not based upon our eloquent preaching or even the power of our preaching, any of those sorts of things. It's the message itself has a power into salvation. As you go and you preach it into who knows what context God could take you into, have a faith that he has sent you with an authority to preach that message. But also in it is a self-replicating DNA. As you sow, as God sends you to sow, it establishes something and then multiplies from that place again over and over again. And it says in Acts 14, I think somewhere it says, and the gospel spread to the entire region. And as you step out and God takes you into a new place to carry that word, you don't know that the seed that you sow isn't going to be that reproducing seed that causes one region after the next to be opened up, one church after another to be planted. The bottom line for me was, from the very beginning, was just to be obedient to what I saw in the scriptures, and that was to go. And I want to encourage you, if you're planting a church, not to say to yourself, well, when we get over that hump or get around that corner, then we'll go to the nations. I think you want to set into the DNA of your church and your people from the very beginning, from the outset. Let's go. Let's get into the nations. And who knows what God's going to do through you. You don't know. I could never have anticipated in that first step of obedience that God would give me now a decade and a half of incredible adventures, abundant fruit, amazing relationships, and it continues even to this day. And from that start has opened up many more doors from there onwards. And so allow God, let the Holy Spirit lead you. Just be praying, say, where, Lord, when, Lord, and step out and do it, and let God show you the hows. Encourage you guys. We're praying for you, even as I know many of you are praying for us in our adventures. God bless.